Welcome back to Gardener's World. Well, we've had a fascinating couple of segments so far with Crichton, but what I want to do now is I want to talk to another gentleman and get his insight into this from a different aspect. If the Celtic cross, and the cross indeed is not necessarily a Christian device, symbol, whatever, or that they took it on from before that time, my next guest will be able to give us some insight into what came before. His name is Steve Mitchell. He is the author of a new film called Dragons and Rings. He is the leading light of a band called Soul Path, who also wrote some wonderful music for Crichton's film, The Cross of Thoth. So I'm very pleased to welcome Steve Mitchell, my good friend. Thank you very much for coming along.
That's all right.
I wanted to get your input into this because you are an expert on the pagan and even the Wiccan side of these things. How do you see this incredible discovery of Crichton's?
Well, I think the first thing to establish really is what people regard as pagan, what people regard as Wiccan. We have a conception nowadays of it which is totally divorced, totally devoid from where it originally started. Pagan essentially means man of the land. It's all about living with the land. But we have this kind of perception that's really based on something that's come from the 50s, that's come via kind of Masonic thought, that's come via kind of Rosicrucian thought, various kind of stuff that's been presented as this is Wicca, you know. And one of the things that, and I'm going to kind of reflect into here because it's something that occurred to me while I was listening into your interview. With respect to the circle, pagans, Wiccans, people who work magic, druids, whatever, tend to work within a circle. And they see this circle is seen as something that's protective, something that keeps away kind of evil forces or whatever. And my one observation to people is, well, if you're living in this amazing kind of world, why do you need to protect yourself? What do you need to protect yourself against? What are you creating? Now, I'll put a kind of case in point here. I've kind of been to various places, and I've seen people cast circle, for want of a better word, and everyone gets into circle and does stuff. And then they say, oh, well, we can't have the children in because it wouldn't be right to have children involved in this. So they put them outside.
in the danger zone.
Well, yeah, you've created this, danger zone. But what's really interesting is the circle becomes a sacred space. And here's the sacredness. And here, I think, is where some of the original knowledge lies, because the circle represents time. It represents that kind of fixed versus chaos. It represents, as you said, good and bad, which is why it's kind of been regarded as that. What, if you like, modern-day Wiccanism, paganism has picked up about that is this kind of element essentially from the 16th century, essentially from sort of Goetia, from all these kind of grimoires, you know, people like Dee, where they'd be thinking, right, let's cast out the demons, let's approach our darker sides.
There's a famous image of them stood in the circle in the graveyard.
Absolutely, with a demon or whatever in the triangle over there. That's great, but you know, it doesn't apply to modern day. And the other thing as well is, I guess, and this is where I think, you know, what I want to hear from you from, is the aspect of really fertility. Because if we go way, 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 way back, and you're talking about hunter-gatherers, and then you're talking about people who essentially settled the land, people who kind of say, right, this is where we're living. The idea of being able to navigate is very important, but also at that point, the idea of being able to know where you are in relation to the seasons, in relation to the stars, the moon, and the sun, which govern, like you say, fertility, govern the crops, govern the animals, and our own fertility as well, is, you know, that's really kind of brings in a different kind of element of why, if you like, these sacred spaces, these original spaces. And again, carrying on into the Christian phase, if you look at the kind of structure of a church, it maintains the same structure, doesn't it?
Yeah? Yes, it does.
Absolutely. And you also mentioned about Eve, and you mentioned about the serpent of wisdom, the serpent of time, giving her the apple, at which point she's also given the knowledge of fertility, the knowledge of cycles, the knowledge of why procreation is important to be done at particular times of the year, as opposed to any time you like.
Such as May, for instance, with the
Absolutely.
May pole.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, to pagans, that's a time of where they reset the calendar.
The human
also-
gestation period is 9 months, so it means that the child is born in January. And therefore, by the time March comes around, which would be a planting time for those people who are agriculturally based, then the child is strong enough to be able to be strapped to mum's back while she either goes out and plants the paddy fields or plants the wheat fields.
So this is a very, very important period then, because May is not only a point of resetting the calendar, it's a point that many of the vicars and pastors of the past reported. Our old pagan friends and even Christian friends ran off into the woods and did the thing. Did
anything goes. Anything goes at that time.
And what essentially have you got? You've got a cross on the floor with your North Star, your Polar Star pointing up, and people weaving time around it, representing time. And it comes back to what you were saying with respect to animals. Why have we called the animals in the solar system particular animals? Because it makes a good story, and a good story is something you remember.
You have to pass it from generation to generation. The concept behind placing a sacred circle would probably be to do with keeping chaos on the outside, since we need to live we need to create and live in a state of order so as to survive. So, for instance, the Egyptians said that the Lord of Chaos was an anteater. How very apt. If you were an ant, you wouldn't want it breaking down the walls of your society. And, of course, anything that was seen to be chaotic or evil or destructive, even like modern kids kicking hell out of bus shelters, would be seen to be destroying your society.
So the chaos would be a hoodie these days.
The chaos could well be a hoodie, but
which actually relates back to the May Games, because this is the period when Robin Hood made merry.
Robin
plays were enacted.
Robin Goodfellow.
The Robin Goodfellow which you can actually trace back strangely through similar people to the Celtic Church.
Yes, absolutely.
And back into paganism. So all these things relate entirely, don't
they? They do, absolutely. And as well, because obviously as a musician, for me, music is about time. Tempo. Music is about tempo, like you say. It's sacred in itself. It's secular.
Measurement of time.
It is. And it's also a measurement of time in order to pass that measurement, pass that knowledge on to someone else in terms of a tune, a song, a dance around a maypole, which is particular patterns, particular figures.
And distance measurement.
Because
quite interesting, I believe, if you have a plumb line on a piece of string that's 15 inches long, it vibrates at 1 beat to the second.
Absolutely, and that gets even crazier, doesn't it, once we're bringing frequency and sound into it, because all of a sudden this instrument isn't just an measurement, instrument of event. It's an instrument of happening.
The great collegiate churches are an example of that. And that was the use of geometry, using instruments like these to create perfect bouncing systems for sound waves so as to enhance the sound of the human voice and what instruments they had in the past. But that also goes back to Maes Howe and some of the great also Irish barrows, where they found out that the use of sound applies in those. So it's all about time measurement or tempo.
But getting back to the pagan point of view, I mean, you've basically ruled out that modern paganism has really got much basis in ancient times, pre-Christian times.
I think what's happened, I think what's happened along the way is people have become confused. They've accepted doctrine, they've accepted thought, they've accepted, for example, a lot of Wicca, for example, is based around the works of Gerald Gardner, who was a guy in the 50s, who basically a Mason. And if you actually look, if you look at all the rites, if you look at all these kind of writings, all these passages, all these quotes, they're fresh out of.
I mean, I must say,
literature.
From an historian's point of view, one has to ask, how do these modern pagans know that this particular ritual was done?
Absolutely.
In pre-Christian times, because Pliny doesn't tell us about these things. For instance, he may go on a little bit about the Druids, tell us various things that they did. Were also very important to this.
The central, absolutely, because the centre of the Masonic rites, or the Scottish Rite Masons, is still Roslin Chapel. And Roslin Chapel is built at the foot of the Pentland Hills, and that indicates the pentagram. And the pentagram, of course, comes from the moon's number, because the Earth wobbles at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. So, and that's quite important, because 360 degrees divided by 72 is 5. And you thereby making a circle, you draw a pentagram. But you can also draw a hexagram.
It makes a shape, the moon kind of makes a pentagram shape.
Yes, well, what happens
Venus.
is the moon,
Venus.
and this was measured in
Does.
ancient times.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
Venus was one of the items that used. Even the Mayans studied Venus. That was their god of war, not their god of love. Because they timed the dry season. They timed the dry season to go to war, and that was when Venus was heliacal.
Well, look at Artemis, huntress.
Absolutely. And so it's all about timekeeping. That's why I wrote my book called The Golden Thread of Time, because this is a tiny golden thread that passes through all the ages, which is unbreakable, if you like, and brings time to our minds again.
Now, one of the things that I find interesting about all this, what you've discovered and the things that you're pointing out about life and death, these are very terrifying things for people. Over time, man has had to find some way of overcoming this. Of course, we have the Gnostics, who gave us lots of very, very wise texts, which is what I write about.
Yeah.
You look at this from a kind of frequency aspect almost, because of your music.
Yeah.
And Crichton looks at it from the sacred position of the cross point, and the related things that are there. So,
Well, may I?
Absolutely.
The cross is only an instrument for interpretation of time, as a guitar would be for the interpretation of time in music language. So the cross interprets astrological time, which is really interesting because Rosslyn Chapel, which we talked about later, which the Knights Templar are associated with, shows every aspect of nature in terms of all its plants and so forth,
Templar
growing in its
nature.
angles. Yeah. But go back to the Great Pyramids. Now, the Great Pyramids, whether you believe they were a tomb or not, actually are the purest example of nature because they incorporate in 360 degrees, 72 degrees, 720 is a number. The speed of the sun is 900 arc minutes an hour. The speed of the moon is 720 arc minutes an hour. Take one from the other is 180. That's in each face of the pyramid. It even has on the pyramids 25,920 when you multiply them all by each other. Where did our multiplication sign
And that is the processional
the
thing that you
mathematics of nature by which we live, the moon which governs menstruation in women, tides and so forth, those numbers are in there, which is why Thoth is mentioned, because Thoth was the god of the moon as well and of wisdom.
Just incredible.
That's something else you kind of pointed out in there, and again, bringing it back, shall we say, into the pagan kind of fold, is within there you mentioned the Knights Templar. And again, you find in that whole kind of belief structure, and particularly in the Catholic belief, that they fell out with the Pope, they fell out with Christian Church over the issue of procreation.
Yeah.
Over the issue of not what everyone kind of assumes, the kind of homosexual element of it, but actually it was over the fact that the Catholic belief was that both abortion and birth control were necessary, and we come back way into our kind of fertility cycle.
I will appreciate that, but I have to say to you that there has a commercial aspect. There's no difference between the commerce of today than there was of then, and it had to do with the Roman Catholic Church, which was in France at the time, combining with the king to go against the Knights Templar who owed money. But what did they want from a Knights Templar? Well, they may well have said there was heresy and so forth they were torturing them for. Actually, what they were torturing out of them was knowledge of timekeeping and how to navigate the world, because it wasn't very long after the end of the Knights Templar that we suddenly spread across and conquered Americas, the Americas.
Well, certainly what Steve was saying is that it was a tool used by them.
Yes, it was a tool,
doubt,
but commercial interests drive things far greater than anything spiritual.
The commercial thing would not be something that you would openly want to state. So they used
Certainly they wouldn't
their
have stated
bourgeois and, you know, the
Absolutely.
So it was a tool to beat them with.
It was a tool to beat them with and to justify their actions, but what they were actually after was the gold and knowledge. Because the Knights Templar, nobody knows where their wealth came from, but there's a very good chance they were trading with South America for 300 years before Columbus.
And what happens following the downfall of the Knights Templars, apart from the dispersal of the ships, etc., is that you know, in the next few hundred years we start to find places.
Absolutely, and of course the Knights Templar knew where they were already, and that was taken from them because the Knights Templar then fled to Scotland and Portugal.
To me, what you've discovered is a key to the past. Just like in the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, they put keys on maps for us to, you know, for people who didn't have the eyes to see, they would not have been able to recognise you know,
well,
how to get from one place.
They had to be protective of their trades. Why do we think in medieval maps or charts it says in the Atlantic Ocean, here be dragons? That's to keep people away from the trade routes. Why would you give away your knowledge? And they didn't give away their knowledge. They kept it. This was only for initiates. It was only for royalty. It was only for priests.
Well, the whole idea of this show has been to release some of this information, and we shall go on to do so. And I'm really thankful of you coming along, both of you, both Crichton Miller and Steve Mitchell, my guests tonight on Gardener's World. Thank you very much, and I do hope to see you again in the future on Edge Media TV. Hello and welcome to Gardener's World. Tonight we've got a really special programme. It's going to be about the Templars, and we've got three extremely special guests. Tim Wallace-Murphy, an expert on the Knights Templar and many other things. Odvar Olsen, another Templar expert and author, and Dr. Robert Feather, another expert who you've seen on TV on many occasions. My first guest tonight is Tim Wallace-Murphy, and most people will know him from the book Roslin. This, of course, is a book that Dan Brown used for the Da Vinci Code, so Tim's got a little bit of infamy from that. His latest books are The Knights of the Holy Grail, which looks like a superb read, and he's very kindly just given me this one, so I should be taking that home with me, so nobody can have it. And The Freemasons, another really interesting read, because Freemasonry is something that I'm really interested in, of course. Tim, thank you so much for coming along. It's nice to have you.
It's good to be here.
My good old friend. Can we start this off by basically giving people a short history of the Knights Templar, if there is such a thing?
Well, do you want the official version or the real version?
Well, let's start with a small official.
Well, the official version is that the Knights Templar were founded somewhere around about 1118 in the city of Jerusalem, ostensibly to guard the pilgrimage routes between Jaffa and Jerusalem. Though quite how they intended to do this is a little unclear, because there were 9 rather elderly knights who were somewhat past their sell-by date at that time. They founded an order which went on to grow at an absolutely baffling speed, and which became one of the most powerful orders within the Christian church. It was, in the beginning, unique, although it was soon subject to imitation by others, in that it was a military order. It was an order of fighting monks who are renowned for bravery to the point of foolhardiness. They never surrendered. They never left the field until ordered to do so by their own Grand Master. And they took military discipline to extreme lengths. They were, in fact, the first standing army in European history since the fall of the Roman Empire. And they were incredibly efficient. But that's not where their real fame lies. No. Because they also, to support their military efforts in the Holy Land, they had a network of properties throughout Europe, from Poland in the north to the Mediterranean coast in the south, from Portugal in the west right through to the Holy Land in the east. They were into viniculture, farming, building, flour milling, trading, shipping, and to support all this, they developed a financial infrastructure which became the precursor of the European banking system. They were one of the most trusted and the earliest efficient bankers in the business. In fact, according to some authorities, and I'm one, they helped create the financial stability that led to the first real chance for the accumulation of capital and the beginnings of capitalism. They had financial power very similar to a multinational conglomerate today. And in their trading patterns, they established a sort of precursor to the European Union. They also invented or brought to the West a Sufi idea, the note of hand, which allowed monetary transactions to be done over long distances without transport of bullion. They were an absolutely phenomenal order, and they were suppressed under charges of heresy. There was a massive wave of arrests that started on October the 13th, 1307. Friday the 13th, unlucky for some, they claimed that that saying came from the arrest of the Templars. And they were suppressed by the Pope, not convicted of heresy, oddly enough, but because they had fallen into disrepute. And they disappeared from plain sight at that point. Their records were suppressed or stolen, we're not quite sure which. And that has left a sort of vacuum of information which has been filled by every fantasist in the business. And they've been writing about the Templars in bizarre terms for nearly 200 years now.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm accused of being one of the fantasists.
For 200 years.
In reality, I try and stick as hard and close to the historical facts as I can, and I'm a stickler for proper archival source material. But the reality that lay behind that potted history is far more fascinating than any fiction or any fantasy.
So we've just had the standard history. So I suspect that some of the alternative history will involve people like the Sufis.
They certainly were close associates of the Sufis who technically were their enemies, but in reality, although the Templars were ostensibly a Christian order, they were heretical in the extreme. And they had been formed as a result of a family conspiracy which involved people whose antecedents stretched back over 1,000 years before the foundation of the Templar order, and families who still exert considerable influence today, and who, several centuries after the suppression of the Templars, played an instrumental role in the foundation of another controversial order, the Worldwide Brotherhood of Freemasonry. So, you know, we have here intrigue, mystery, accusations of conspiracy, which are very largely true in many respects, plus heresy. It's an explosive mix. Throw in the Inquisition and a few burnings at the stake, and you've got the start of a very powerful and compelling story.
Is this why the concept of the Knights Templar is so strong? The legacy is so strong? I mean, because there are many other orders, weren't there, as well?
Oh yes, but there are many other orders. Of a monastic type, some of which are still going today. And there was only one that approached the Templar in rapidity of growth, and that was the Cistercians. And in many respects, for the first 50 years or so of the Templars' existence, the Templars and the Cistercians were simply different arms of the same body. The Cistercian order were the contemplative arm, and the Templar order were the military arm. And after that period, they started to separate and go their own separate ways. But it was because of the difference in their underlying belief system that the Templars were able to accomplish so much, and this is why they're remembered. And this is why they're the center of so much interest today. And to the extent that many modern orders have been founded in sort of imitation of the Templars. And people join them, people of goodwill and intent, who like to serve their community and try and recreate the ideals of Templarism. But the claims by some of those orders to be continuations of the Templar are, to say the least, spurious or highly imaginative. They've got no foundation in fact.
Yeah, because we have some certain people like Aleister Crowley and various others that were involved in some of the early...
Yes, well, if you want to talk about Crowley, you better set up about 5 special programs.
We need a long time for that.
Gold mine.
But one of the big things, physical, real things that people like to attach onto with the Templars is this notion that they dug beneath the temple in Jerusalem and discovered some treasure.
There is a certain amount of evidence supporting that. Charles Warren, who at that time was a lieutenant in the Royal Engineers, started to excavate beneath and around the Temple Mount in the latter part of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. And he sent many records of his excavations and correspondence to a very close friend in Edinburgh, Mr. Bryden. Now, Bryden's son, Robert Bryden, is a very close friend and colleague of mine, and I've seen some of the documentation, including sketches of a shaft they discovered that went vertically downwards for, I think it was something over 90 feet through solid rock, that led to a system of radiating tunnels.
And that can be dated to that period?
That can be dated to at or about the time of the Templars, because there's nobody else we know that we have any indication of who may have dug there. But it can be dated to the Templars and attributed to them because some of the artifacts that are found beneath, within those tunnels, some of which ended up back in Scotland, and I've seen them, including Templar spurs and part of a Templar sword. So there is a certain amount of hard evidence.
So you've seen these, they're not in a university?
Oh no, they're not they're in a private collection. They're in a private collection of Robert Bryden in Scotland. Right. But what was the point of the excavations and what was actually found there is a matter of pure speculation, because hand on heart, nobody actually knows.
There's no traditions or
oh, there are many traditions. There are one that says they found the Holy Grail, not the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, and brought that back to Chartres Cathedral. There are others that they found documentation or temple treasure from prior to the sack of the temple in AD 70. But the reality is nobody has the faintest idea. There is no proof whatsoever of any of this.
Right. There is a concept, isn't there, that they may have taken some secret also into the Languedoc, into the Cathars?
That story has been floated again many times, and there isn't one shred of evidence to back it up. It's a lovely story, but that's all it is.
Right.
And where one can finally draw the line between myth, legend, and reality within any aspect of Templar history or speculation is a very arguable point that people will be discussing for centuries to come.
This is the reasons for its longevity.
Yes, it is, because it is a mystery.
Yeah. And this is probably one of the reasons that other orders, such as, for instance, the Sovereign Military Order of Malta or the Knights of Malta or St. John, they don't get the same kind of attention, do they?
They don't get the same sort of attention, but they in their own right have a very viable and very valid history, which is very well documented. I've recently spent some time, a couple of years ago, in Malta looking at some of the buildings that those knights left behind. And they exerted, again, a profound influence on the development of European society, but not in the same way as the Templars did. And because the Knights of Malta are well documented and well known, there is little room for speculation. Whereas the Templar,
there's a slight period, you know, with Grandmaster Pinto getting involved in alchemy, which is fascinating.
Yes, and there is also a period where the Knights of Malta were under investigation by the Inquisition because of their membership of several leading members of the order within the ranks of Freemasonry.
Yeah. And that's that particular period of Pinto was one of those. I mean, it was claimed also by a couple of Scottishmen that Pinto gathered around him 20 or so special people and created a secret society.
There is a degree of truth in that, but you see, the point of that secret society, the point of alchemy, the point of the search for the Holy Grail, which is inextricably linked with the Knights Templar, it's all about a pathway of spiritual transformation, which, of course, immediately places those who follow it outside the remit of the Church and classes them as heresy. The Church's claim is that outside the Church there is no salvation, whereas the Grail quest was summed up by Professor Joseph Campbell, that wonderful American man, as a search for spiritual transformation. And Campbell quoted a passage from the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus was reported as saying, "He who drinks from my mouth, I shall become he, and he shall become me." And this is the whole point of the spiritual path, be it within Christianity, be it outside of Christianity or within Islam, or from the Native American traditions, or any indigenous tradition. It's all about bringing about a closer union with the God within. We each have that part within us, and it's a case of identifying and accessing that inner source, which we have previously been denied by society.
Why? You've written another book called What Islam Did for Us, I believe, and it's a superb book. I've read it a couple of times. And obviously, you know me, you know that I'm into Islam in certain ways. Why do you think that Islam and Templars, why do you think that they came together in any way? We've got a very short amount of time for this one.
Very easily. The Sufi path teaches its followers that enlightenment begins when you can recognize the divine signature in every aspect of God's creation, and by serving that, you serve God. It's spiritual transformation again.
It's the same stuff.
Yeah.
And this is what we believe, that the Templars recognized.
This is exactly what it was about. The masterstroke of immortalizing the Templars was the creation of the Grail sagas.
Absolutely. And the Grail, of course, is the journey that we all have to take. It's asking the right question.
Yeah.